Well, ladies and gentlemen, my goodness, we've got some huge updates as it pertains to Israel, Iran. The ceasefire officially announced yesterday. It was a little bit of a strange announcement in terms of the terms of the ceasefire. There was a 6 hour de escalation time period from when Trump announced it on Truth Social until when it went into effect, and there was a disagreement within 30 minutes of Tehran time versus Tel Aviv time, and people are saying, well, somebody broke it, and there might have been a few missiles fired. What I read into this is the ceasefire, at least right now, and who knows what happens when I upload this video, maybe it'll be off, but right now, the ceasefire is still on. Israel and Iran knew they had this de-escalation period to get their last strikes in onto each other. And so I guess that caused Trump to be very upset because there was heavy escalation. He singles out Israel here. He really verbalizes how angry he is. This is about 7 a.m. this morning, DC time, Trump talking to the media. And so right now, there's a lot of unknowns. We can talk about the ceasefire. I have not done a video on the actual ceasefire. It came out at like 7 o'clock last night. I streamed and I talked about it on my stream. By the way, guys, I do stream pretty much every night at like 7 o'clock if any viewers want to tune into that. But when it comes to this, it seems like the key stuff is the ceasefire between Israel and Iran for the time is still on. Yes, it is fragile, but it's still on. Israel and Iran were given a time period to de-escalate, and in that time period, they wanted to get their last shots onto each other as more of a posture going into this hopefully peaceful period where the ceasefire is actually adhered to. We just got the situation. I mean, it is kind of a similar situation in the sense of about a week of fighting and then a ceasefire with India, Pakistan, and that ceasefire is held. Now, this is different in terms of what's involved in terms of the substance of this war, but Trump went really hard after Israel here. And I don't necessarily think Trump 100% knows kind of the stuff behind the scenes about how people think. Younger people say, Israel controls the United States to a degree. But it does seem like Trump does, at certain moments, try and posture himself against Netanyahu. And it seems like this was another one of those moments. And then we also have to talk about the ceasefire and what happens to the enriched uranium that Iran still has. Now, whether it's 60% or 70% or whatever it is, they at least have 60% enriched uranium. The enriched uranium can be transported, and I'm sure they've got other facilities. I'm not saying it was not a catastrophic blow to their nuclear program, which it was when Trump hit Fordo and the other nuclear sites with the MOBs, and Israel's been bombing. Israel hit Fordo about 24 hours ago as well. But the point here is, I'm concerned that because everything to a degree has been destabilized, the United States striking Iran, people thinking this was going to turn into this huge regional war, and who knows what's happening. I mean, ceasefires, they get broken all the time. Middle Eastern ceasefires are very flimsy. But the point is, it seems like they overestimated Iran's response and their current state and how their regime normally acts to situations. Now, you can say this is more of an escalation than the assassination of Soleimani. People right after that said it was going to be World War III, it was going to be this global war, nothing happened. People were saying this is different than that because this is trying to disarm their potential nuclear program, which they view as extremely necessary, Iran does. And they're at 60% enrichment. And then we can argue, are they actually developing? Are they trying to weaponize it? Are they at the 90%? Are they in the miniaturization process of the creation of a nuclear bomb? I said a lot of that was fear-mongering, and I still believe that. But the point is they still have enrichment somewhere. And J.D. Vance because yesterday, the only person to publicly speak outside of, from what I saw in the cabinet was Vance. Trump gave no speeches. This is Trump now addressing the media. And so there was no one else. And Vance yesterday said, well, we still have to do something about the uranium, because obviously they still have enriched uranium. And the concern is that Netanyahu will then use this as a fearmonger. You can already kind of see it in the weeds. Because Iran feels threatened, now they're going to race to creating a nuclear bomb after all of these strikes. And so are we in the same position? Is this a better position because we potentially disarmed their nuclear program? Vance in one sentence says we destroyed their nuclear program with 0 U.S. casualties. I mean, fundamentally, the only thing you can get Trump for on this is Israel appeasement. That's it. Because obviously it's a lot more important for Israel that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon than the United States. You could say, well, it's important for both. But based off of Israel and Iran's relationship and how close they are in terms of their proximity and how big the United States is, why would Iran want to attack the United States? They would be calling for their own death. So it's more important for Israel. But the reason I say that is because fundamentally, if this is how it ends and this is a ceasefire and maybe it's not, 0 U.S. casualties, very little invested by the United States in terms of money on this war, if you want to call it that. The United States, this is not a U.S. war. Because they're saying, oh, no new wars. Trump can't say that tagline anymore. This is not, you could say it's a 12-day war. The U.S. was involved for 2 days. You could say we shot down some Iranian missiles, but still 0 U.S. casualties, very weak Iran response, and destroying the crown jewel nuclear facility that took 10 years to build, Fordo, the fortress. And we don't know exactly the status on Fordo, if it's completely destroyed, if it's partially destroyed. But this can be spun as a massive win for Trump. But where do we go from here? Is there going to be a nuclear deal? Is there even a nuclear program for Iran to have some type of deal? I would imagine there is. There's got to be other facilities. They're going to transport the enriched uranium, whether it's 60% or whatever. The issue is they still have that. So now we're at a time to where we struck them. They still have that. And you have to wonder, does Israel say, well, we have to, because Trump today said he doesn't want regime change. It would cause chaos. After tweeting that it would be good on Sunday. So there's a lot of mixed signals in terms of that. Let's see what Trump says here. And he's very angry about the situation with Israel and Iran. And this is Trump talking about the ceasefire potentially not being honored. We think it's being honored right now. We think that because of the way the ceasefire was done with the de-escalation period, Israel and Iran were doing a little bit of global posturing, just like Iran did yesterday when they told the United States. I mean, this is what happened. They said, we are going to strike this base. They told the Qatar airspace. They said, this is what we're doing. And that's because it was all a posture for the regime to tell the people, we responded. Even though 13 out of the 14 missiles were intercepted, and the only one that was not intercepted was calculated by the U.S. missile defense to fall in an area to where it was safe, and it was not worth it to use the resources. Israel does something similar with the Iron Dome. If there's missiles that are so off target, you're not going to send defense missiles at them because it's a waste of resources and it's a waste of use in terms of the defense missiles. Let it land. Let the missile land in a desert, basically. But let's see what Trump says here.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them.
Let me just add, he said they have 12 hours. I think that's him saying 12 hours to de-escalate. And then because Israel and Iran knew they had such little time, they unloaded.
I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
So there's Trump, saying they don't know what the fuck they are doing. You can say, oh, presidents, it's not good to curse. Well, no, it's to emphasize it. So when you do it very lightly like that, it's a subtle thing, and it really emphasizes where Trump is in terms of his emotional state and how drained it is when it comes to the Middle Eastern conflict. But you can take a look at this. Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it's going to be a major violation. Bring your pilots home. Trump is pissed. Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody will be hurt. Ceasefire is in effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Trump says we don't want to see regime change in Iran. It's also been reported, I don't have it here, but Trump was very angry and gave a really stern, hard phone call to Netanyahu. Whether or not that means he's going to reassess his policy when it comes to Israel and helping them, I highly doubt it. But there is at least some of that global posture in terms of him being angry at Netanyahu. So the ceasefire, we believe, is still in effect, at least right now. Now, listen, there's just so much unknown. And this is why I thought it just seemed unlikely that Iran would agree to this, because now what happens? People are saying, well, there could be a nuclear deal, but what does a nuclear deal look like for Iran? Trump has said he wants a unconditional surrender. Iran has just agreed to this ceasefire. Where do we go from here? And what do we do about their enriched uranium that they undoubtedly still have somewhere, that we would imagine that Israel is going to say, hey, they still have this, and now they're really going to go for developing a nuclear bomb. I'm not saying the strikes on the facilities were not important. That was key nuclear infrastructure, especially Fordo, that was built hundreds of feet in the ground. As long as Fordo has been destroyed, we presume it has been, or it has at least been severely damaged, potentially beyond repair. That it's very important, but that doesn't mean their entire nuclear program is just gone completely. But yes, they lost very key infrastructure when it comes to being able to produce a nuclear bomb. But the question is, what does the intel say about them potentially having other sites? Remember 2 months ago, it came out there was this secret site that they had found. And so that's something we're going to have to see. But it does seem like there's a ton of unknowns when it comes to, obviously, we know Israel wants regime change in Iran. Trump did come out and say, again, he doesn't want a regime change because it would be chaos. You could argue, well, based on the current regime and how unliked they are, that we would be fine with a regime change, but that would have to be by the Iranian people, not through U.S. destabilization of the region, which is what Israel, I would imagine, would be looking at in terms of how they would want this to go, because that would be the easiest way to get it, is through destabilization with U.S. and Israeli involvement. But listen, the understanding of the ceasefire and what Israel is doing, or what Iran is doing, it's clear that it seems like it's going to be very hard to hold the ceasefire together for too long. I hope that's the case, but we were in a similar scenario just 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, because it was a 12-day war. This would be day 13. So right before the war, and we had the 2-month period of negotiating with Iran. That was happening. That was real. And they said on day 61, so right after the period was over, Israel struck Iran, even though it seemed like Trump was still willing to continue negotiations after the 2-month period had ended, because they had set up their next round of talks. Israel then strikes Iran, and then the United States. And you can say, well, this is a win for Israel. People saying it's a loss for Israel. I mean, definitely, if your goal is to make sure they don't have nuclear bombs, the United States assisting with MOBs, which Israel does not have. They don't have the B-2 bombers. They don't have the ability to drop that massive of a payload via an airplane. You could say this is a massive win for Israel, although at least at this point they haven't gotten their regime change, and now Trump is saying he's coming out against regime change, calling it chaos, even though Netanyahu obviously wants it. And Trump has this weird relationship with Netanyahu where 3 days ago he says he's strong and he's being treated unfairly because a lot of people within Israel don't like Netanyahu. But now he says, well, he had this huge talk with Netanyahu. Netanyahu needs to stop. It was obvious there was a wind down period, and Israel and Iran escalated the wind down period to try and get final strikes on each other. Now, will the ceasefire last? Will it be just a 1 week, a 2 week thing? We still have to figure out the situation when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, because JD Vance says it's been totally destroyed. Then he says we'll see in terms of finding the rest of their, enriched uranium. Does this potentially threaten Iran and their regime to the point to where they're worried about Israel convincing the U.S. to try and enact a regime change in Iran? I mean, this is how crazy it is. You look at Israel saying, this came out a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, they could have assassinated the Ayatollah. Remember, during their first initial, what they call preemptive strikes, they assassinated 5 or 6 government officials, 2 nuclear scientists, and they said they could have assassinated Ayatollah Khamenei. And so Trump said, don't do it. We still want to negotiate with them. But you have to wonder, is that something they consider doing now if they really want to push for regime change? But now that the ceasefire is in place and Trump is very stern on it and very angry specifically at Israel, because if you remember that thing we just watched, the media was like, well, did Iran break the ceasefire? And then he said, well, Iran broke it, but so did Israel. And so if Israel decides to actually break it by an assassination or by, this, maybe Trump will be very angry about this and he'll say, we're done. We're not dealing with it. And remember, this was the thing with that the Trump people were saying, we're in and we're out. We're in and we're out. We hurt significantly hampered their ability to produce a nuclear bomb because we hit their 3 biggest infrastructure nuclear facilities. Let's just be done with it. And we've got some type of ceasefire, but I don't know where this leaves their nuclear program. I don't know where it leaves some type of deal, with the United States, because that was the whole thing. The whole idea was the United States wanted them to have 0% enrichment. And obviously they didn't want that. Whether they wanted 3.67, which was the Obama deal, or 2%, I don't exactly know. But obviously at this point, now that there's a ceasefire, it's like, okay, what happens next? Is Iran going to agree to like some long-term peace agreement? Is there going to, Trump wants unconditional surrender. He said he just wanted it to be over. So there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to the future now that there is this, what I would consider a very tentative ceasefire in place. And I was very surprised that the ceasefire happened because of the fundamental differences of what the United States wants and what Iran wants, and especially after the United States struck Iran. The reason it was done was because people overestimated Iran in terms of their ability to respond. And another part of it is have proper allies, not be completely isolated. And you could argue they're not completely isolated. But when you're talking about threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, it's not something that is very viable. And even if they started a targeted harassment tactic or campaign, it would very much anger China because of the amount of oil that they get from the Strait. Although people have to understand in terms of the oil markets, just because we get 5% of our oil from that Strait, that doesn't mean it only affects us slightly. Oil is a global market, so it would affect us directly and it would affect our markets directly. Now, hopefully none of that will end up mattering. We saw what happened with crude oil. Now, what is crude oil back down to $64, $65? Amazing. Even with all of this unknown, it's back down. It shot up to $73, $74, $75. It's already back down. Hopefully it stays that way. You know what? Why don't I just go to it instead of saying it? $64. What did it shoot up to totally? $78, $79. It's all the way back down to $64. During the lows in April and May, we saw it trade probably at an average of around $61, $62. That's per barrel, and we're barely above that now. So any type of huge increase in gas prices has been, for the time being, eliminated. And we're not going to deal with it because when, you can't even really say, oh, that's ridiculously high, because even at the high water mark, we saw it earlier this year be higher. So to put it in perspective, and the fact that it was there for such a low period of time, it's not going to have a big impact at the pump for Americans, which is something that certainly will affect in terms of, I wonder if there is, this is for a nuclear deal, 43% chance. I wonder if there is a question on if the ceasefire will last. U.S.-Iran ceasefire before July. Well, I mean, the U.S. is not really engaging right now. Yes, the ceasefire was between Israel and Iran, not the U.S. and Iran. But we also have to understand the reason this is happening is in part because of the weak, or in heavily part because of the weak Iranian response to the United States strikes on the nuclear plants. They told the United States, and then we intercepted basically all of their missiles. They said, this is where we're going to be hitting. So, there is a lot of caution when it comes to this, and that shows me that Iran is really not in a state to where it's screw everything, we're done. Their regime still wants to be in power, and they don't want to be completely destroyed. And so we'll see if this ends up coming together. Iran developing a nuke in 2025, 11% chance. And so that's basically the update. So the ceasefire is still in place. It's tentative. It's loose, but it's still in place. The strikes that came at the end, that was the final barrage by both sides. But right now, we're looking at a ceasefire, and we'll see what the United States does in terms of their discussions with Iran on their nuclear program. And obviously, Israel is still going to want regime change. Trump is saying we're not interested in that. And so maybe this can be Trump's off-ramp, his true off-ramp to really de-entangle the United States within the region, at least to a degree that maybe is notable. He can tell Israel, we struck them, we did it, we went in, we're out, and hopefully, this can be a situation. It is me being very optimistic. I mean, it's the Middle East after all, it's the United States. But, there have been time periods in the past where there's been less U.S. involvement and no crazy hot wars, and hopefully this situation gets solved. We still have to solve the Palestine situation as well. And then you've also got Russia, Ukraine. And it was a funny thing that came up where Putin had, because of his relationship with the Iranians, Putin had said, do you need my help? And there's been some talk of maybe Putin being a facilitator and having this deal come together. And Trump said, no, I don't need your help with this current conflict. I need your help, with Russia and Ukraine. And so, that's another big thing. It's Russia, Ukraine is one that Trump has wanted to solve for a while. And maybe that's next. But ceasefires, they can hold. Like we see one holding right now between India and Pakistan. But it's interesting because this would really not be Israel's main goal. The main goal is regime change. And so Trump is saying right now, no, it's not going to happen. We've seen Trump in the past few months kind of stand up to Israel, but then stand down. So maybe we'll see in terms of how this ends up playing out. But guys, make sure you like this video down below. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.